briefest audio note / essay, only because my laptop really now. The batteries, none of my batteries keep going. All that matters is when you have a kind of her word, insight. I don't know, I suppose it's the right word. Just something precipitates in your head. All that matters is that you have a pleasurable sensation as it precipitates, close to joy. If it's good, but then only time will tell if it's really good. Time meaning years, decades, centuries even. I mean, Fair Dinkum. What did I watch? Oh, yes. Oh, it's awful. I still haven't finished it. But if you go to Up Movies, you can find a pirate copy of Megalopolis, Francis Ford Coppola. Yeah, it's awful. Mainly awful. But there's a really good scene about an hour in where the daughter of Caesar's, you don't like the characters. Caesar's opponent, is he the mayor? No, is he the commissioner of police? The black guy, I forget. Anyway, she is with her father at dinner. The three main characters are gathered. I can't remember the film star who plays the Caesar. I don't like him really. Oh, I can see he's so attractive to the modern mindset of the sort of a sort of hurt and slightly ill lead role. I've seen a few films with him in it, with a few films starring him. And always so unhealthy looking, despite his tallness and good body. Right. So she's quoting bits of, is it Plato, Socrates, Marcus Aurelius? I can't remember which. But she rattles off some good quotes, in fact. It's actually quite a good scene, I suppose. But, yeah, where are the new? Are we stuck with these quotes, these cliched phrases from people several thousand years ago? Anyway, to the point. What was I going to say? Oh, yes, I know what it is. So, yeah, all that matters. So you doze off or wake up first thing with like, something interesting is precipitated. And if one could turn it into slightly more beautiful language, maybe it will last for centuries, for millennia. Do I sound like I give a shit? Right, but it's this. So, this is not it, but this is the context. I dislike too many people, especially men, but women too, got stuck in this endless 24-hour, well, even that's a silly phrase, the news. 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I'm way above that. Now, I followed deeply every twist and turn of Brexit because I had an agreement with the mother of my daughter 27 years ago that we would basically head back to Europe where it is so much more psychologically healthy on average across the board. By which I mean 5, 7 times, if one can measure these things. Britain became America, but I actually think we became worse than America because we deny we became America, the awfulness of America, the obsession for status and possessions, which America does have. I've lived there. I know exactly what it's like. The inability to, well, live there, I say that, a month or two at most, but several chunks of a month or two. And I kind of monitor it, and my best friend in my 20s was an American woman, platonic, but very deeply most influential person on my life, really. Anyway, to the point. Yes, Britain became America, but we are worse because we pretend. Our whole spin image is that we are somehow wiser and more wholesome, although our pathetic pundit class can't even use words like wholesome. Anyway, let's keep to the point. Why did I start going off? Yes, the context. So the context is, yes, I followed avidly what's happening during lead up to 2016 referendum, which none of us, although even I at the time was too much of a moron to think, a major treaty change. Most societies would peg that at the vote has to be 60-40. Yeah, I guess we just didn't really think about it. We assumed the referendum would just cement membership of the enlightened groupings across Europe. Anyway, I'm not a Ramona. I accepted it entirely, although it's worth writing about and thinking about properly what really happened, just as a historical record. I've got one that is so brilliant it will be famous. Not that I give a shit. Anyway, to the point. So, monitoring the European thing very carefully because I wanted to know what are my options as a me person. One day I likely will try and spend a big chunk of my life again in Europe. So what are the technical options? How are the Europeans going to think of us? What is going to end up as the legal framework for whether or not one can get residence, or is one's EHIC card even going to still work? Anyway, to the point. So I allowed myself for 2 or 3 years, and also, can we do anything about that 2016? What's next? And I went through the whole, I was full-time, because I actually was also going around gently speaking with people from 2017 early on, first of all assessing what people, and I lived over 4 constituencies, large ones, which were potentially a bit swingy come next election, come if there was some kind of different vote. Anyway, to the point. So yes, I kept my head fully in all sorts of news, commentary, analysis, sources, which was only an unpleasant and at times exasperating process, and cemented to me that everybody, every single person, even AC Grayling, I had a long chat with in person early 2019, had become infantilized. Nobody saying anything that may really make a difference. The only good commentator I came across, although I wish she'd just gone a little bit further, was Zoe Williams with her Prospect article, early spring 2019. The Zoe Williams, the Guardian writer. I always have been on the breadline, and I printed out at my own cost. I did colour prints. I made about 50 or 100 copies. I even kind of got her. I got Prospect's permission. I wouldn't fucking ask them. They're a load of. I was a Prospect subscriber very early on, probably 5 years ago. Yeah, I had a bit of a flurry of correspondence with them. Hey, this is such an incredible article that she's written and you've published. I'm going to be distributing this article because it was a neutral article, so to speak. Anyway, I'm going to distribute this article person to person. I'm going to print copies out, and I'm even going to make colour copies and put them in people's hands who may be kind of slightly influential in my local region, which to me is always a 30-kilometre circle. And they said, bless you, go ahead. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, forget it. It's just the infantile inability, even of pretty, very educated and supposedly intellectual friends, just demonstrated there is no hope for Britain. Everybody except me became a pathetic butterfly brain and totally unable to have any solidarity. And even this is in very rural places with a few thoughtful people who'd had lives elsewhere, were theoretically grown-ups with money, so comfortable and able to sit down, logistically able to sit down and ponder. What could we do to bring influence in these actually 5 constituencies around us if there is a further democratic ask of the people? No. I mean, it's just pathetic. I would wander around for 3 years, I, by foot and bicycle, travelled about 4,000 kilometres. No, all I encountered was patheticness. Right to the point. So, the news. I don't really follow. I'm above the news. That sounds arrogant. Because I'm lucky. I've spent some time actually doing stuff, real stuff, not gluing fingers to rails or being some whatever. Really taking risks, very serious risks. 2005 to 10, and a bit beyond, really. 10, 11, 12. I was writing technically in contravention of my own law that was crystal clear. You're not allowed to write about certain things if there's... Anyway, I'm not going to go into that. But I'm lucky, because that means you're deep down inside, you're esteemed, and you gradually become secure. I've done it. I've actually put my existence and happiness or almost life on the line over a long period of time. Actually, from 2003. May 2003, as it happens. So, I'm esteemed. I've done my bit. I can never meet anybody who can just knuckle down and do their bit. Never. Never, never, never. Good for me. What a horrible, arrogant, conceited way of putting it, but it is the truth. Have I actually met anybody in the last 10 years? No, I have not met anybody. If you're going to take forward a cause, you really have to go all the way, and you also have to accept the really horrible part is, oh, well, I'd like to be just doing this a few months, but as it ticks along, oh my God, It's going to be 2 years. It's going to be 5 years. I used to write, I only respect one person, an activist, Hull man. I think it was about 15 years ago. He eventually succeeded. A man in Hull who'd been a docker in Thatcher times, and Thatcher's privatisation had wiped out their pension pots. And I wish I could find out his name. I did know it. No, I'd encountered it then, 15 years ago, because he was in the news for having succeeded. 30 years he'd plodded along, friendless. He'd been writing letters to MPs, etc., saying we must have our pensions fully reinstated because the docks had been privatised and the private adopters of the docks had not honoured the pensions of several thousand people. Yeah, so he plodded away. No one took any notice of him. He was thought a bit stupid, and he just plodded along 30 years. Exhausting. But eventually he succeeded. About 2010 or 11, 12, it was in the public domain. Now, I didn't have time to check all the details, if it really did come to pass, but the authority had agreed his claim on behalf of thousands of others was valid. Yes, now he's the only person I respect. Right, to the point. So, the news. Yeah, keep your head out of the news, but yeah, I let my head fully into the news then, and then I found the COVID period interesting because it just demonstrated how, in fact, everything in Britain and other countries is set to the neurotic city person. Country people, proper ones, well, they understood. And it's not going to kill me going outside for a long walk. Anyway, let's avoid that. I think it was fascinating, and you have to accept. Well, there were various interesting things for another day. And then Ukraine. Well, when Ukraine broke out, I know enough about Central Europe and Western Russian politics, etc., etc. I'm not terribly interested, really, and knew on day one, and I even had it confirmed from a very horrible man, a very aggressive man, who his setting was his personal setting. I knew him reasonably well at the time. His answer to everything would be, "Oh, fucking go and beat him up." But he was a fairly wealthy 65-year-old businessman who'd done a lot, who lived in Central Europe and Russia. A total Rambo. A Rambo pretending to be an English gentleman. And I was really surprised. I knew on day one, they've got no hope. Sack for peace. He said the same thing, and he actually was doing the psychodrama, melodrama on his internet. Oh, I'm rescuing people from Ukraine, families who I knew. I'm trying to get them relocated, etc. I don't believe a word. He was on the internet because he was obsessed with the internet and had made himself ill and mad. But even he, I saw him about a week after Ukraine started, maybe 4 or 5 days. Even he said, they've got no hope. They're going to get slaughtered. Because we know the psychogeography or the mindset or whatever word you want to use of that part of the world, plus not stupid about the reality of American, Western, NATO politics, etc. They're going to get slaughtered. They should give up. And he was more pro-Ukrainian than you can ever imagine. Like, oh, I've got friends from Latvia who now live in Ukraine and all of this. I'm trying to organise rescue and food and stuff for them from his stupid internet, which I'm sure was all just basically an alcoholic made-up load of rubbish, but he did actually care. And he cared, basically. So in other words, if you care about people in that part of the world who aren't allied to Russia, they should have given up, because what's happened? Both of us, me and him, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands are just going to get slaughtered. And that's what's happened. Anyway, so I didn't really follow that one much. But then, because all my adult life, in the background, if there was one political issue, it is Palestine, I've followed matters Middle East from the 7th of October. And I know I'm totally right. Gaza lost on the 8th of October. But here's the point. Right. So, yeah, it's terribly sad. It's exhausting. It's not the biggest war in the world. The biggest war in the last decade has been Congo, I believe, with, I think, 10 times more people slaughtered, or it's at least 5 times more. So it's not the biggest war in the world. However, now, I wrote years ago, I get the Israelis and the use of the word anti-Semitism only at one level, which is there are bigger wars, there are worse human rights violations around the world, China, and yet Israel-Palestine, or Israel upon Palestine, gets mentioned far more. They're genuine, horrible, torturous, cruel human rights violations that Israel has been carrying out for the last 20 years or more. But they are right. Although they don't clarify it. They don't come up with one simple, authoritative rhetoric line. I mean, their PR is just a joke. And that should have been, you, the world, you pick on us because, yes, we do have our little human rights violations, which means people dying in agony, tortured. But there are many countries who do it far worse than us. You give us all the news coverage and you have your little Owen Joneses and all those kinds of people going on about us. Well, even I. 40 years ago, it was top of our... 40 years... Oh, I'm not that old. Yes, I am. Yeah, it was top of our bloody watch list then. So shut the fuck up about us. You know, proportionately, we should be mentioned 1 in 20 conversations. Deal with Congo, deal with China, deal with... Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But they're not good enough at rhetoric to say that. Right, but here's the point. So, in the last 10 years, a range of conversations. I have made conversations with a sort of small, inner, rather pathetic circle. And we have some intelligent conversations. But, yeah, who's the baddie? What's the morality? Is there any morality one can ascertain? Now, here's the point. Up to now, I've merely nattered context because I care what people think about me. I haven't lost myself to the news or anything like that. I particularly actually have followed the Israel-Gaza matter because, as my daughter has studied human rights and has an MA in human rights, I've assumed over the last year that she cares about it, that it will be on her radar as an important, major thing in her younger life, and I'm sure it is, just as Gulf War I, and then even more so Croatia, Serbia was in my mental development, psychological experience. So, what can we really say? But here, this shows now the appalling, even Peter Oborne, even, I've just tried to find the good commentators. Pilger's dead, unfortunately. Mind you, Pilger did become a little bit too kind of, I don't know, he became a bit too kind of moany activist. He should have just, in the last decade. Anyway, here's the point. So, hearing a few days ago that Israel had been kind of targeting UN compounds, blue helmets, UN compounds in southern Lebanon. Now, and they carried on targeting them, and I think it was yesterday or the day before. This is Monday, the 14th of October, so I think it was Saturday, the 12th. They had attacked and injured some more, or there was definite, deliberate aggression towards a UN compound. Now, I believe in the UN. Nobody's perfect, but it's all we've got. That's what we saw in Sarajevo. Sarajevo was not so much about American bombing, or Bosnia, I should say. It was not about British-American bombing. In fact, it's kind of said that didn't really make that much difference. I don't know. I can't even remember the details. But one thing I do know, the presence of the UN blue helmets was, without a doubt, heroic, because they were unarmed, a heroic and important aspect to trying to protect, to save some lives in Bosnia, Sarajevo, and other places. Right, so a week or two ago, Israel starts to, without a doubt, cheekily target some UN people in Lebanon. Now, the question is, why the hell aren't the UN in Gaza, West Bank, etc.? God only knows. Oh, and Israel as well, to help them. Northern Israel, where they're being evilly attacked by Hezbollah's rockets. Why aren't UN there more? But here is the real question. This is the question I want. I want your pathetic little Owen Joneses, people like that, even, well, just as pathetic as Sarkar, who thinks she's Mother Teresa with a microphone. Why has nobody asked the following question, or simply made the following simple statement? In other places of the world, over the last 20 or 30 years, have UN compounds been attacked by Serbs, Croats, Liberians? I'm sure in Lebanon. Have UN peacekeeping camps been attacked? That's a question I'd like answered, because I know the most important word in the English language and Hebrew and all the other languages is relative. Because what have we had? I mean, we're now going through a phase, the last month or two, all sorts of slightly creepy morons. People like Rubin and all these kinds of people are saying, well, the normal ratio of civilians to combatants killed in wars is 9 to 1, I think they quote for, I can't remember. But, that's grotesque. And they say, oh, well, in Gaza, it's been 2 to 1. Only 2 civilians killed in Gaza for one supposed Hamas fighter. Well, most of these Hamas fighters are actually just ordinary blokes who might have been on a Hamas Christmas party welcome parade. That is grotesque, but backing out of that. So I want to know, relative to other peoples, are Israel committing something? Have Israel gone way over a line, or gone over a line that nobody in Yugoslavia really went over, nobody in Liberia and other places the UN have been there as world policeman peacekeeper? I want to know that. That's the one thing I want to know, because I want to make a moral judgment. Now, that's not the insight, because straight away, when I heard of this, that was our journalism is appalling. But then here's the thing. Here is the thing. The insight, the precipitate. Really, all of these, well, often enough wars, we've almost ignored, almost forgotten. Syria, Libya. There have been quite a few wars in the last 20 years. Right, to the point. I think you could almost say there's an equation, a simple equation. Now let me put it in the following terms. If a first world or rich society acts over these lines, acts in a way that's over what is a very high bar, in fact, particularly if, like me, you're a walkawayist, there is almost always a way of walking away pacifistically. But keep to the point. If a first world rich nation, I think it really just comes down to rich, actually. If a rich society, nation, people act in a way that is counter the tragically high bar of human rights violation, and that can be America and Britain in Iraq and Afghanistan, there is plenty of evidence now that I think that's pretty incontrovertible that British SAS or Special Forces did target deliberately and unnecessarily civilians in Afghanistan. So I think this is the equation. If a rich society, America in Guantanamo Bay, etc., acts in especially cruel, revolting ways, the equation throughout the world is, well, that society gets much more condemnation. That's the way it is. It's not a moral thing, it's just the way it is. That's the way the world is. And there are plenty of examples of that. China is a rich society, or has become one, so is behaving in certain ways to the Uyghurs that the whole of the West is condemning. Burma or Myanmar is not really a rich society. We condemned for a while the way the Burmese authorities were behaving towards the Muslim minority, or it doesn't, and ordinary activists. But we don't even talk about it anymore. We've forgotten old Aung San Suu Kyi. You could say the same, of course, for Congo, where I'm sure, which I believe is the world's biggest war over the last decade. We hardly ever even hear anything about it. This is the way the world is. And so, Israel is, fact, a rich society. I'm sure if you looked up GDP, but then you've got to factor in, well, America's putting tons and tons of cash in as well, and Britain to a small extent. So Israel is a rich society. I've got no interest. No one should have any interest in imagined bloodlines, especially in the week we discover Christopher Columbus was actually Jewish, whatever Jewish actually means. Back to the UN. If a rich society is behaving way the wrong side of a kind of understood universal line, don't fucking attack the UN, who don't fight back with bullets. That is a moral. I mean, if we give actions numbers, and yes, there are arguments on both sides for whether or not Israel has been since 7th of October acting in self-defense, etc., or even there are plenty of intelligent people. Oh no, I don't call them intelligent because all war is stupid. There are plenty of intelligent people who are even saying, I mean, I was listening to a good interview, it has to be said. Yes, Rubin with the ex-Trump administration American ambassador to Israel, I think, or was it Gaza? I forget. I was listening to it last night. Now, his position, as is Rubin's, that the whole region needs strongmanning by Israel to, in the medium term, force peace upon the Arab places surrounding. Now, I do not agree with this argument. I only agree with those who seek genuine peace via peaceful means. It is possible. Sorry, it's possible, but nobody does it. That's not the point, though. I'm going to return to my point. So there are plenty of people who argue, probably the majority, who argue, well, there's been a war in the Middle East. Quite rightly, people say, well, in reality, the 47 war between the Arabs and the Israelis never really stopped. That's kind of valid. I'm not actually giving opinions other than I want to know about a moral absolute. There have been crystal clear what you could call war crimes on both sides for 70 years. Crystal clear. Or you can get fancy and say violations of the Geneva Convention, or you can use all these fancy phrases. And I've always been on the side of, well, you see, I don't buy it that everybody in Gaza actually tomorrow is going to be a Hamas supporter. If the Palestinian people of Gaza were treated equally, I think most of them, I've known some Palestinians well, I think most of them would actually say, and that's it. We do not ever support anymore violent nutcases who were the minority in Hamas. Not many of whom follow the kind of ISIS death cult. No, they're much more sophisticated. Well, the leadership of Hamas were living in Dubai in five-star hotels, for God's sake. Right, to the point. So, to return to the point. One can say over 70 years, but particularly the last 20 years, I mean, for every one Israeli killed, I think the average was about 10 Palestinians. So you could say there's a kind of moral absolute that one society is much more cruel than the other in reality, but then there's all the arguments, well, they're acting in self-defense, etc. Avoiding those arguments. No, I've just misspoke. Keeping all that horrible, tragic mess in one box, there's another box, which is you don't fuck around with the UN. Is that a higher order of morality? I return to my point. I'd like to hear a journalist tell me whether or not. I mean, I suspect, in fact, that blue helmets were damaged, perhaps even killed, in Sudan. I don't know, because our journalism is so poor. So I come back to the point, the equation. And I do think it is appropriate if a rich society, which Israel is, commits, well, as the Nazis did. But, of course, we all know that that then became the largest massive industrialized over-the-line behaviour last century. But nevertheless, I think that's the equation. The equation is if the rich society, America or Britain, or Israel, or other rich societies, go from a 8 out of 10 bad behaviour, which Israel arguably has been doing the last year, to a 9 out of 10, which is going around and duffing up the UN peacekeepers. That's what the equation is, regardless of whether they're previously genocided people of the book or whatever. And a grown-up, even Peter Oborne has disappointed me. Yeah, a grown-up needs to be articulating these things. I'm not saying my own unique, copyrighted insight, the equation, I'm using that word figuratively, is some kind of super genius, but I think it's a reasonable attempt at trying to be philosophical about what is the state of modernity, which really is about the last 30 years. Funnily enough, I think Alexei Sayle did a very good job. I had a discussion with him about 5 years ago, where he was saying that in the 70s and 80s, the British establishment, and I think he referred to the American establishment too, kind of let the people play. 60s, 70s, the establishment let the people play as payback for the sacrifices of the working classes in the Second World War. That was kind of the unwritten compact, because the 70s and 80s were pretty good in many ways. The satirical movement of that was the week that was, Cambridge Footlights, etc., etc. It largely succeeded. They were allowed to succeed. Cambridge Footlights in 62, I forget the exact detail. There was actually a very good Radio 4 play about this about 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. I have the reference on ralphschism.com. They were allowed, or rather, they publicly embarrassed the Prime Minister of the time, I think it was Gateskill, very seriously, horrifically. Publicly embarrassed him. He was actually in the audience of their review. Initially, the country was horrified, but within 6 months, the country agreed with them that the guy deserved his humiliation. So that kind of partial revolution, 60s, 70s, via intelligent culture, Peter Sellers and all of those kinds of people, was allowed, and then through universities, it was allowed. It was like you will be much freer and more autonomous, and intelligent socialism sort of came along. Okay, we can have all sorts of arguments, blah blah blah, but as of about the 90s, the establishment put the reins back on. Okay, the plebs have had a couple of fun decades. Let's turn them into our slaves again. And largely is true in terms of the phenomenal new disparity in incomes, top and bottom. Right, so yes, blah, blah, blah. Why did I mention that? I mention that merely because, yes, these moral, or just, what is the equation that governs modern society, i.e. the last 30 years, from when the reins were put back on, and behind the scenes you have your kind of neocon and your, well, it's just the top 1%, although I prefer to think of it as the top 5%. Military-industrial complex, I call it the monolith because it also has to include media, pharma, all of that. I'm sorry, I'm way ahead of these people. I used the phrase monolith, I think 15 years ago for all of it. It's just the massive bourgeois construct. So this massive bourgeois construct, which is everything, and it is all the ordinary people too, because they are it. They sold out to it. The monolith, nevertheless, still has its own moral equation, or let's avoid the word moral, because in a way moral is a silly word, just equation of even the monolith will be horrified largely by certain behaviours of the rich countries, as I have described, those way over the line behaviours, torturing people in Abu Ghraib prison, getting them to be raped by dogs or whatever happened, that kind of stuff, which I'm sure is happening in Congo too, and other places, Libya, Syria, yes. But we tend not to focus on them too much. We focus on these way over the line behaviours by the rich societies. That's just the way humanity became, particularly over the last 30 years, and to some extent earlier. So, that is what the world is, or rather, the supposedly sophisticated aspect of the world. And if that is what it is, if Israel is committing the act of aggressing the UN, I believe that that constitutes a step further into being genuinely a member of the real baddies. or at least that behaviour needs to be held up as, sorry, this is not just very over the line, this is really, really way, way over the line. Okay, if the Holocaust is 10 out of 10, it's an 8, whereas the last 20 years of Israeli murdering more Palestinians, you could perhaps say that's a 7 or a 6. But I want somebody who's fucking paid properly to simplify the current world into such easier to make decisions, things, ways of speaking about where we are that are easier to make decisions. The ordinary person, my daughter, a few acquaintances I have with brains, full stop, the end.